Kirti Shah, and it is my honor to be part of the NUV Media Conference hosted by the Faculty of Journalism and Mass Communication, Navratna University. I'm thankful to my professors, Dr. Robbie Augustine and Akhila CK, for guiding me throughout my process of working on the research paper. Thank you so much, sir and ma'am. And so, to brief about myself, I am someone who identifies herself as a cinephile, and cinephile is actually a term used for people who love everything, anything about cinema, associated with cinema, be it stories or anything that is there to talk about cinema. So, and yes, I am also someone who aspires to be a filmmaker someday in future, and so the thesis work that I have done is of course based on cinema and a well-known director who is considered to be the greatest living filmmaker today in the world, and he goes by the name Quentin Tarantino, who is an American filmmaker and has been actively working as a writer and director in the industry for almost 3 decades now. So I had great time working on my research thesis on Quentin Tarantino, and I did try to define any peculiarity dedicated in his work, but as it is about cinema, it is about filmmaking, I arrived at a conclusion that it is not possible to define or dictate a single artist or single filmmaker's work. But whatever I have involved in my work is purely based on what is actually ignored by the audiences and what is actually meant by the filmmaker to portray in his or her movie. So, alright, so the first and the foremost part of the presentation is the abstract, and I have mentioned few pointers about the abstract for the reference purpose. So I'll start with the first point, and that is what describes what is the signature part of Quentin Tarantino's work, and why he is considered to be signature and definitive in his work. So basically his films constitute a remarkable storytelling structure. It is possibly something different, something unusual, something new that has not been experienced by the audiences before in with their experience with cinema. The themes, the characters, the storylines, the story arc, the drama, it all builds up to one single narrative, and all these elements, they bind the entire structure together and they make up the movie of Quentin Tarantino, or the least, which I like to describe as the Quentin Tarantino cinematic universe. So that's what the first point is all about. Then coming to the second point about the themes and the characters. So basically the idea about a human being is portrayed as a character with and the camera serves as the medium for the audience and for the story, and the director is just one person who is considered to be the foremost and the significant person who is allowing us to identify with the characters that he or she has written. In case of Quentin Tarantino, I guess he's very specific with his characters, he's very specific with his themes, very specific with the way he wants to tell the story, and why he wants to tell the story is of course one of the important part. So there's a point which says that we human beings are just a mere speck of dust in the universe, but when you watch a movie, there are characters which they struck us so much in our mind that we somehow or the other way around we relate or we may not relate with the characters, we may end up hating or loving the character or anything like that. But in truest form, Quentin Tarantino's work, his characters and his storylines are such that they do not want to justify that there is any loving or hate perspective involved from the audience's side for the movies. It's just like that you are paying the ticket, you're paying for the ticket, you're coming and experiencing this gigantic work of art which is available for all of us to watch in the movie theaters, and we just have to go and sit and watch it and experience that I think Quentin Tarantino wants us to experience, and it's a part of his entire game. So I guess that's all about the second point. The third point is about the cultural codes, which I think is the best way to put it, that why certain filmmakers are able to grab audiences' eyeballs and why they are always way ahead than the other filmmakers. And Quentin Tarantino is one such filmmaker who has been able to not define in one sense, but has been able to put out cultural codes in a very significant manner in his movies, be it from his debut movie Reservoir Dogs or his last movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He has always been particular with the cultural codes, not depending on the time when those movies were made and released, but in its singularity, giving out the universal appeal. If I give an example about the cultural codes, it's let's take for example his very well-known movie Pulp Fiction. It is not about that what object is part of the cultural code. Here the basic cultural code which comes to the interpretation is the narrative structure of the movie. It's non-linear, it's not the direct structure that normally we end up watching in movies, that there's a beginning, there is this setup, there is confrontation, and there's the conclusion. No, that's not the ideal structure followed in the Pulp Fiction movie. It's non-linear. It's actually showing different stories intertwined with a common thread or anything that is there. And why it is a cultural code? Because it ends up telling us something that is the essence of the life. And that cultural code is actually universally built. Our lives are not linear. Our lives are not something that follow in a sequential pattern or synchronized pattern, and we always don't end up getting the things that we plan for. But yes, there is always addition and subtraction in that process as well. So that's one part. The other cultural code in that extended part of cinema can be defined as the pop cultural references, or the music, the songs, and the elements of pastiche and homage and everything that actually builds up to be part of the cultural codes. So that's what cultural codes in this particular research paper signifies. And the last is the narrative and the thematic representation, which I already mentioned about the narrative. Quentin is very particular about his narrative, and the ones who have watched his movies, I am sure that they will agree with this point about the narrative. It's not something that usually ends up convincing everyone, but one must have patience to watch the movies which are made in a way that actually give out some sense to it. It makes you keep thinking even after it ends, and even it not haunts it does not haunt you, but it actually grabs your attention for quite a long time, I guess. And that is what happened with me when I started watching his movies for the first time. They stayed with me for a long time. They They always made me think. They always made me, you know, I was always confused with who makes this kind of movies, But yes, this is what cinema is actually all about. It's not about following conventional storytelling. It's not about following rules. It is about breaking the rules. That's how I think, such great masterpieces end up making. So that's all the abstract is all about, including everything about, signature style of Quentin Tarantino and the other part. So I'll start with the introduction part. As you can see, the introduction part is divided into 10 different sections. All these topics are independent from each other, but together they make up the basis of the research work. And so I'll go through them quickly. I'll be specific and I'll make sure that I go into the details in short period of time. So yes, all of these topics, they are somewhere or the other way around aiming to tell something about why there is something known as Tarantino cinematic universe, why cinema exists in our life, why there is something known as Auteur theory, which defines a director's specific work and defines a film director equivalent to author of a play or a novel, and why two American filmmakers like David Lynch and Quentin Tarantino, and why their work is so different in many levels, but their ideology presented in their work is somewhere or the other way around similar, and why there is supposed to be a thematic representations of different narrative structures, and why all these things intertwine with each other to define a particular character. So most of the Quentin Tarantino movies are character driven. They are as well story driven as well, but that's the beauty of Tarantino movies, that story and the character, they're able to mix each other up and tell something to the audience, which I think audience may not have experienced before. That is what Quentin Tarantino is always aiming for when he makes a new movie. Even starting from Reservoir Dogs, his debut movie, till the last one, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he has given us something new every time. So yes, so all of these topics, they make up a certain kind of understanding of why there is a requirement for studying these things, why cinema and cinema of a particular filmmaker is is supposed to be studied. And my introduction part actually describes those all functionality. So I'll move to the review of literature part. So in the review of literature part, I found out that I have to be specific with the ideas that I have made for writing the research paper. So basically, when you're analyzing a film or a director's work, you end up analyzing almost every technical or creative detail that is there. But from this research work, I aimed to define the certain ideologies present in a movie, and especially in Quentin Tarantino's movies. So apart from defining the camera work or the color theory or costumes or even acting at times, or all of these things, all of these arts which actually make up an entire movie, I I analyzed the part where storytelling is the key essence of it, and only the movie is considered in this part, and the person who was behind making the movie. So here in the review of literature, I tried to find out what is there about the postmodern ideology, which is one of the crux of Tarantino movies. Postmodernism in general is something that is a strong reaction to modernism, and Tarantino's characters are actually built in that way. They are presented to the audience in that way. They are actually someone who are portrayed in a way that their presence on screen is a strong reaction to the modernism, and and how they are trapped in this entire turmoil in the canvas of modernism, and how they are trying to break apart from those chains. So in my review of literature, I tried to find out that, and I ended up finding out a lot of things about why themes and narrative structure and the character struggle are part of the very basis of any Tarantino movies. And a review of literature mostly consisted of this part, analyzing the narrative structure, understanding the themes and why they're important for any movie storytelling. Now move forward to the methodology part. Methodology, I mostly did the content analysis part. I did not approach for the quantitative method. I found a qualitative method will be more appropriate here in this sense, because my research work mainly comprised of analyzing the movies of Quentin Tarantino. So what I analyzed in this part was mostly about of course, why Quentin Tarantino should be considered as an auteur filmmaker, and as auteur theory has its origin in the French New Wave movement, which originated in France in 1950s. But what is the American significance of the auteur theory? So I came across a very good essay written on auteur theory by an American critic known as Andrew Saris, who wrote the essay back in early 1960s, where he described the entire idea of being an auteur, not only for any American filmmaker, but why there is a pantheon of directors who are considered to be distinctive from any other filmmakers working in any country in the world. So, and I tried to analyze that what are the points, or what are the little things, the minimal things in Quentin Tarantino's work which end up defining him as an auteur. So Andrew Saris's essay on the auteur theory was a basis for me to analyze Quentin Tarantino's work as an auteur. And last but not the least, so yes, the other points in the methodology are about the idea of feminism involved in Tarantino's cinematic universe, and of course the cultural domain in which the stories of Quentin Tarantino are based on. And the other point includes the thematic and the narrative, which I also mentioned earlier in the introduction part. So these were the three main topics which I considered for the methodology for content analysis part, and I will be discussing about them in detail in the content analysis part. So the other 2 points of the methodology are one is feminism and the cultural domain in Quentin Tarantino's movies. Feminism in respect to selected movies. I have break down the entire part, the ideology of feminism that is there, but not in context of any intellectually infused idea of feminism. But when it comes to cinema, there is a different kind of feminism that is, shown to us. And Quentin Tarantino's movies are actually, twisted in that way. It's a twisted manifestation of feminism, and I liked that part very much, so I took it further, and it became the part of my content analysis. And the cultural domain, basically the reason of the idea of postmodernism that I mentioned earlier. So that becomes a very important factor, a very crucial factor for the storyline of Tarantino's cinematic universe. And last but not the least, the narrative and the thematic representation that I discussed earlier in the introduction part. So all these 3 points are the core of my content analysis part, which I'll be describing further in the next chapter. So now let's move to the main part, that is the content analysis part. So the first thing that comes to my mind about the content analysis is that I'll be talking about the auteur theory, which I think is a very significant part of this thesis of this research work. So, as I mentioned earlier, auteur theory has its origin in the French New Wave movement. Auteur theory actually came out as a strong reaction to the Hollywood studio system, which existed during that point of time. It is still today, but it came out as a strong reaction that the directors and the writers should have full liberty over their art. And auteur theory has its roots in that entire ideology. The distinction between the Hollywood studio system and the filmmakers who wanted to exercise rigorous control over their work and art. So there was a shift in the movie making after when the new Hollywood wave movement emerged, wherein filmmakers like Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, Brian De Palma, Francis Ford Coppola, and to name a few, they came out with a different approach of storytelling with their movies. And they did not break apart the Hollywood studio system though, but still it came out as a strong reaction to new age of filmmaking, a new age of filmmakers. And Quentin Tarantino is someone who was inspired by one of the new wave Hollywood filmmakers, and that is Brian De Palma. So a lot of violence and stylistic action that we see in Quentin Tarantino movies is very much inspired by Brian De Palma and his movies. So yes, of course, auteur theory. Auteur theory is now a universally accepted concept, always mentioned by many of the critics, people in cinema and filmmaking industry. They use this word, and it is today we can define a lot of filmmakers who are auteurs, who have a rigorous control over their art with their movies and with their writing techniques and everything. So auteur theory is all about that. What Andrew Saris tells us about auteur theory is different than what the original auteur theory tells us about. Andrew Saris actually gives out mentions of distinctions and the levels and different subjects through which a director can be identified as an auteur. And it's not necessary that the director must be a writer for the movie, because there are cases in which the director may or may not be the writer, but that does not change the fact that he or she is not an auteur. A director can be an auteur as well, a writer-director can be an auteur as well. In case of Tarantino, he is a writer and director, so he is considered as auteur. according to the analysis that I did for the Andrew Sarris's essay. So, and one of the significant points that I came across in the essay was that American filmmakers are forced to give a motif of their personal identity in their movies, add a personal reflection of their lives, inspired by their lives in their movies. And Quentin Tarantino many a times has mentioned that a lot of scenes and a lot of minimal moments that he has written and directed for his films are somehow one or the other way around are inspired by his personal experiences. In some of them he never mentions clearly which experiences they are, but still he tells them in a very different way. So yes, and so Andrew Sarris's essay on auteur theory is somehow a defining essay, which can be I guess a guide for someone to tell which director is an auteur or not. But many filmmakers have they have disagreed with the theory. They have neglected the idea of the auteur theory. But according to the when an audience, when someone like me who watches the movie so thoroughly and so in detailed manner, I end up seeing the movies directed by a particular director, and I try to identify whether he or she has been successful into defining one or the aspects of his or her filmmaking in the cluster of his or her films. The next point is about the themes and characters in Tarantino movies. So the themes and characters, they both are dependent on each other in any Tarantino movie. The movies that I have analyzed for the research work is Kill Bill series, Inglourious Basterds, Pulp Fiction, and these four are the ones that I have closely analyzed, including some aspects of the movie Django Unchained. So I'll just brief about these movies. Pulp Fiction is a movie that, according to the research work, I'll define as something that is a strong and a beautiful example of what a postmodern movie looks like, is all about. There are others as well, but in case of Tarantino, this one movie actually defines what postmodernism is all about. Second, Kill Bill series is about one character, about this amazing female character known as the Bride, who is on her quest to seek revenge from the ones who have wronged her, the ones who have tried to kill her, and and how she ends up seeking the revenge. And Kill Bill series is a movie that is an inspiration in every set, inspired by a lot of movies across the world, as Quentin Tarantino likes to always mention the influences that he has came across while watching the movies around the world, be it from Japan, be it from India, be it from the French New Wave filmmakers or the Italians, all of them. There is some sort of inspiration in any of his movies, and Kill Bill series is one of them. And then Inglourious Basterds, which is one of my favorite movies, is about it starts with it's a movie that serves your expectations above anything else. It's a literal example of what an actual reality serves you, and then how it twists at the end of the movie. and how you are introduced to an alternate world. And that is the definition of a Tarantino movie according to me, and I've tried to infuse that in the movie as well. And Django Unchained is about black slavery. It's also a revenge drama altogether in a different way, but also serves the purpose of fairy tale storytelling. One who watches closely, all of the things involved in the movie are actually highlighting the fairy tale storytelling. I'll quickly go through the conclusion part of the research paper. So in the conclusion part, I've mentioned 2 points in the PPT, and the first one is that how we are telling the story, or how well we are telling the story. Storytelling is a part of our lives. We have to tell stories in order to survive. Even in our day-to-day lives, we end up telling lies, and they are actually stories. But what is cinema and storytelling for filmmakers? It's different. It is always different. There is no specific or generic definition for telling stories. But how you are telling the story, meaning the director is telling the story, is an important aspect of cinematic storytelling. It is different than a novel. It is different than a theater play. It is different than a monologue. It is different than news or anything. Cinema is one of the forms of storytelling which invites us on a journey to identify unconscious identities, which I've mentioned in the other point. Our unconscious identities which we think are repressed in our minds, but they somehow take their form in front of us, on the screens, in theaters, in cinema halls, and we go and experience them. And for 2 or 3 hours, we are engrossed into this world, and we become part of the storytelling process. No, even though we are not part of it. And that is when we are watching the movie, the director has tied off his all connections with his or her movie, and has given us the opportunity to experience the storytelling experience. So I think that's all about conclusion. And one point that I would like to add is that one underlying part of my research work was that as literature and the philosophers and painters and everybody is considered to be of high level of creative men of letters and creative people in their own area of expertise, men of in this sense, in terms of cinema, what I was trying to figure out was that, and mentioned in the paper as well, is that men of cinema are equivalent to what men of letters are. So by men I mean man and woman both, male and female both. There is no distinction, there is no gender specificity involved in this. So, and from this I want to conclude that Quentin Tarantino's work is work of cinema. It is work of a higher level of cinema, which I think will be remembered for till the time cinema is alive. And cinema is always in turbulence. It is always falling up and down, up and down. But I think a cinephile like me will make it sure that it doesn't die. So that the reason I ended up doing research work on Quentin Tarantino is just because my love for cinema and love for such movies. So, yeah, thank you so much for your time.